The slap cracked through the cabin like a thunderclap, silencing every row around them. 11-year-old Zariah Bennett sat frozen, her cheek stinging, her wide eyes searching for someone, anyone, to say it wasn't okay. And just when the silence felt like it would crush her, a calm voice from behind rose up. "Ma'am, you just assaulted a child." Zariah Bennett clutched the strap of her backpack so tight her knuckles turned white. The boarding pass in her hand was slightly crinkled from how often she'd checked it. Gate B12. American Airlines Flight 1782. Her first solo flight. Her mother knelt beside her, gently brushing a loose curl from her forehead. "You're strong, you're smart, and you know how to handle anything, baby girl." Zariah nodded, not because she felt brave, but because she wanted her mom to believe she was. The agent at the gate smiled, scanned the pass, and waved her through. As she walked down the jet bridge, the noise of the airport faded behind her, replaced by the low hum of engines and the scent of recycled air. Her heart raced with something between fear and excitement. This was big. Grown-up big. She was going to visit Grandma and Papa in Charlotte, just like a real adult traveler. She boarded, eyes wide, scanning rows of seats for 17B. She found it, middle seat, of course. Squeezing past the aisle passenger, a teenage boy with earbuds deep in his ears and his head bowed to a phone, she gave a polite "excuse me" and slid into the narrow space. Her backpack went under the seat. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to take up as little room as possible. On her right, by the window, sat an older white woman with tightly permed hair and a blazer that didn't quite hide the stiffness in her posture. The woman didn't look at her. Arms folded, eyes locked on the tarmac, lips set like someone who already regretted being on this flight. Zariah offered a shy smile anyway. "Hi." No response. Not even a glance. That was okay. Not everyone had to talk. Her mother had told her that, too. Sometimes people carry their own storms. Just don't let them rain on you. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Zariah pulled out her tablet, her pink headphones, and settled into an episode of her favorite cartoon. Something goofy. Something light. Something that felt like protection. The plane took off smoothly, and Zariah grinned as the ground fell away. She was flying. She was really flying by herself. 10 minutes after takeoff, the turbulence hit. Not hard, just enough to make the drink carts rattle and her stomach dip. She paused her show, pulled out the tiny can of ginger ale her grandmother had packed into her carry-on with a note that said "just in case." Her hand moved to the floor to retrieve it, her elbow gently brushing the arm of the woman beside her. It wasn't hard. Not careless. Just one of those things that happens when space is tight and people are human. But the reaction was anything but human. The woman's head snapped around, venom flashing in her eyes. "Watch where you're going," she hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. Zariah blinked, startled. I'm sorry. "I didn't mean, you people," the woman said louder now, enough for nearby passengers to hear, "never know how to behave in public." Zariah's heart dropped. Her throat dried. Her body froze in place. She heard the words, but they didn't fully register, just jagged syllables tearing through her mind like a siren. "What?" she whispered. The woman leaned in, voice low but lethal, each word dropped like a stone. "Your kind always makes things difficult." Then, without warning, the slap came. Sharp. Sudden. A crack across her cheek that snapped her head to the side. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. Her skin burned. But more than that, her chest did, a tight, aching squeeze of shame and confusion. The sound echoed louder than it should have. It was like the entire row had heard it, and they had. The boy beside her looked up, one earbud dangling. A man across the aisle dropped his magazine. Someone behind them muttered, "Oh my God." And still, no one moved. Not yet. Zariah's hand lifted slowly to her cheek. She didn't cry. Not right away. She was still processing, trying to understand how a moment could turn like that. The woman beside her sat back with smug satisfaction, as if she'd simply swatted away a fly. "Maybe now you'll learn to keep your hands to yourself," she said. And that was when a seatbelt clicked behind them. A man stood up, tall, broad-shouldered, skin the color of deep coffee, wearing a gray hoodie and dark jeans. Glasses slipped slightly down his nose as he leaned forward over the seat. "Ma'am," his voice was low, but it cut through the cabin like thunder, "you just assaulted a child." His name was Malcolm Pierce, though Zariah didn't know that yet. What she did know was that someone was standing up for her. Finally, the woman turned toward him slowly, her face twisted with entitlement. "This doesn't concern you," she spat. Malcolm tilted his head. "It does now. You laid hands on a child. In front of witnesses." "She elbowed me," the woman said, defensive now. "These kids don't know how to respect adults. And you think slapping them is the solution?" His voice never rose. That made it worse. It was calm. Unshakable. Absolute. "You don't get to make this about race either." "I didn't," you said, "you're kind." We all heard it. Someone behind them added, "I heard it too." Another voice joined, "She slapped that girl." That's assault. The cabin was waking up. People who had been silent were now speaking. Phones were out, recording. Eyes were watching. The woman's confidence began to falter. The teenage boy beside Zariah removed both earbuds. "She didn't do anything wrong," he said. The lady freaked out. A flight attendant appeared, her steps swift and firm. "What's going on here?" Malcolm stepped aside. "This woman struck a child and made racist remarks." The attendant crouched to Zariah's level. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Zariah nodded, but her voice was paper-thin. "She got mad when I bumped her by accident." The attendant rose to her full height. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me to the galley." "I'm not the one who should be moved. This is not a discussion," the attendant said, firmer now. "You're being reassigned." The woman realized what was happening. She looked around, eyes on her, cameras recording, and stood with a muttered curse, grabbing her bag and storming off toward the back. As she passed Malcolm, he didn't move. He didn't blink. He just watched. When she was gone, the attendant returned. "Thank you," she said to Malcolm. "Security will be waiting when we land." He nodded, then looked down at Zariah. "Mind if I sit here for a bit?" The teen boy stood instantly, gladly switching seats. Malcolm eased into 17C. "You all right?" Zariah didn't answer at first. Then, with a small shrug, she said, "I guess." "You don't have to be," he replied. "That was a lot. But you handled yourself." Her lip quivered. "She said stuff I didn't even understand." "Why was she so mean?" Malcolm exhaled. "Because it wasn't about you. People like her, they carry hate around like a purse. Doesn't matter who you are, if you don't fit what they expect, they lash out." "Did I do something wrong?" Her voice was a whisper. "Not even close," he said gently. "You were just being a kid. A brave kid flying alone." Zariah blinked back tears. Malcolm leaned back slightly, folding his hands in his lap. He didn't try to fix it. He just let her sit. Let her breathe. Around them, the cabin slowly returned to its hum. But something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. When the captain's voice finally crackled over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an onboard incident, we are making an unscheduled landing in Nashville." Nobody asked why. They already knew. Zariah glanced at the seat where the woman had been. Empty now. Then she looked at Malcolm. And though she didn't know him, didn't even know his name yet, one thought settled deep inside her chest: she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The cabin door opened with a hiss, and the warm Tennessee air rushed in, mixing with the stale tension that still clung to the rows of seats like static. Zariah hadn't spoken since the slap, her small fingers still clutching the now warm can of ginger ale she never got to open. Around her, passengers pretended to scroll their phones or read, but their eyes darted toward her and the man seated beside her, the one who stood up when no one else did. The one who changed everything. Malcolm Pierce leaned slightly toward her, voice low and steady. "We're here. There'll be someone waiting. Don't worry, kiddo, you're not alone in this." Zariah gave a small nod, her throat too tight for words. A flight attendant approached with gentle eyes. "Zariah, sweetie? There's an officer waiting to speak with you, but only if you feel ready." Zariah glanced at Malcolm. He gave her a look that didn't push, didn't force, just reminded her she had someone in her corner. She stood slowly, feeling the burn in her cheek where the woman's palm had landed, feeling the weight of too many stares and too little understanding. But she walked. And Malcolm walked with her. Just past the jet bridge, in a quiet corner near Gate C10, stood a man in uniform with a kind, tired face and the soft posture of someone used to calming tense moments. "Officer Morales," he said, kneeling slightly to meet Zariah's eyes. "You're not in any trouble. I just want to hear what happened and make sure you're okay." She nodded again and slowly, haltingly, began to speak. Her voice was thin at first, but as she told him about the turbulence, the elbow bump, the way Edith's voice sliced the air, and the sting of the slap, her words gained weight. Malcolm stood a respectful distance away but within sight, arms crossed and eyes fixed not on the officer, but on Zariah. Officer Morales listened, asked once or twice if she wanted to take a break, but never interrupted. When she was done, he took a breath and said, "You did the right thing by speaking up. That took a lot of courage." Zariah blinked quickly, not wanting to cry again. "Will she get in trouble?" "Yes," he said gently. "She already is." The older woman, Edith Langston, was being questioned in another room. Officer Morales didn't say much more about her. He didn't have to. It was enough to know the adults were finally paying attention. Afterward, Zariah sat on a small vinyl bench in the quiet waiting area, sipping a new can of ginger ale Malcolm had bought her from the vending machine. It tasted a little like bubbles and a lot like calm. "You handled yourself like a champ," Malcolm said, settling into the seat beside her. "I didn't feel like one," she admitted. "I felt invisible. And loud at the same time." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Yeah. That's what hate does. It makes you feel like you're taking up space you don't deserve, even when all you did was breathe." She looked at him. "Why did you help me?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When I was about your age, I got blamed for stealing a calculator at school. Teacher found it under someone else's desk, but since I was the only black kid in the class, she just decided. No one stood up for me. Not even my friends. I swore, if I ever saw something like that happen again, I wouldn't stay quiet." Zariah absorbed that, then asked, "What happened after?" "They never apologized," Malcolm said with a faint smile. "But I found other people who saw me for who I was. And I stopped shrinking myself." They sat quietly after that, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of understanding. Soon, a flight attendant approached and let them know it was time to reboard. As they stepped back onto the plane, passengers shifted in their seats. Some looked away. Others gave Zariah small nods, acknowledgement without pity. The teenage boy who had shared the row with her was already seated by the window. When Malcolm gestured to the middle seat, the boy stood without hesitation. "You can sit here," he said, looking at Zariah. "I think she wants you close." Malcolm smiled and settled in beside her again. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky once more, Zariah leaned gently against his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Somewhere over Georgia, as clouds curled like cotton around the plane, Malcolm pulled a crumpled boarding pass from his pocket and started sketching on the back with a borrowed pen. "You like stories?" he asked. Zariah looked up. "Yeah." "Why?" "Because I think you just lived through one. And someday, if you want, You can tell it your way. She thought about that. About what it would feel like to hold the pen, to shape what happened, not as a victim, but as the author. The captain's voice came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in Charlotte shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. As the wheels touched down, Zariah felt the first true breath in her chest all day. At the gate, people slowly gathered their bags, filing off with the restless energy of travelers ready to be done. But Zariah didn't rush. She stood when Malcolm stood, following him into the terminal. And there, just beyond the security ropes, stood her father. Marcus Bennett, tall, broad, with worry in his eyes and love in his stance. The moment he saw her, he pushed through the crowd, reaching for her like he'd never let go. Zariah, he breathed, lifting her up into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder, finally letting the tears fall. When they parted, Marcus looked over at Malcolm. You stayed with her? Yes, sir, Malcolm said simply. Made sure she wasn't alone. Marcus's eyes shimmered. He extended a hand, shook Malcolm's with quiet strength. Thank you. From a father who couldn't be there, thank you. Zariah tugged on her dad's sleeve. Can I tell you what happened? He crouched beside her, eye level. I want you to tell me everything. Every word. No. One else gets to write your story. That night, back in her room, Zariah sat at her desk with a fresh diary. The pages smelled like new beginnings. She opened to the first page and wrote, Today, I learned that some people will try to make you feel small. But I also learned that kindness stands taller. She paused, then added, I didn't cry when it happened. But I cried when I was safe. That matters too. Her cheek still ached faintly, but the deeper ache, the one in her chest, was softer now. She knew the world wouldn't always be fair. But now, she also knew what it looked like when someone stood up. And that made all the difference. At her desk, Zariah stared at the soft glow of her nightlight as her pencil hovered over the first page of her new journal. The rest of the house was quiet. Her dad had finally gone to bed after checking in on her 3 times, and now, in the stillness, she had room to think. Her hand moved slowly as she wrote, Some people hurt you and act like it's nothing. But sometimes, someone shows up who reminds you you're not small. And that changes everything. She paused, then added, His name was Malcolm. Days passed, but the memory stayed sharp. Not just the sting of the slap, but the way Malcolm had looked at Edith, unflinching and calm, not afraid to speak the truth. And the way he looked at her, Zariah, with care, not pity. It was something she carried with her when she returned to school the following Monday. She stepped through the doors of Monroe Middle School different than when she'd left. She walked a little taller, not because she wanted to be noticed, but because she finally believed she belonged. Her English teacher, Ms. Hightower, greeted the class with her usual big smile and a voice full of too much caffeine. All right, everyone. This week we're doing our personal narrative unit. And you know what that means, time to share a moment that changed you. A few groans rippled through the room, but Zariah's hand shot up before she even realized it. Ms. Hightower raised her eyebrows. Zariah? You want to go first? Zariah nodded. Her palms were damp. Her heart beat louder than she thought possible. But she stood. She didn't read from a page. She didn't need to. A week ago, she began, I flew alone for the first time to visit my grandparents in Charlotte. On the way there, something happened to me that I'll never forget. The room grew quiet. Students leaned forward. There was a woman sitting beside me, an older lady. I accidentally bumped her when turbulence hit. I said sorry. She slapped me. Gasps echoed. A few mouths fell open. She told me people like me didn't know how to act. She called me your type. And no one said anything until a man sitting behind us stood up. Her voice didn't waver. His name was Malcolm. He spoke calmly, but clearly. He told her what she did was wrong. He said it wasn't okay to hit a child. And that her words were racist. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. But he made it stop. Miss Hightower wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. Zariah wasn't done. The plane landed in Nashville instead of Charlotte. Security came. She was removed. I got to finish the trip with someone beside me who made me feel safe. Someone who told me I wasn't wrong for just being. Silence wrapped around the room like a blanket. Then soft claps began. A few students stood. By the time Zariah sat back down, the entire room was applauding. After class, her teacher pulled her aside. "I hope you know how brave that was." Zariah nodded. "I didn't feel brave when it happened." "Sometimes bravery isn't loud," Miss Hightower said. "It's honest." Within a day, word spread. Other teachers asked her to share the story. Then the principal. By Friday, Zariah stood in front of the entire 7th grade in the school auditorium. Some kids she barely knew sat in the front row, wide-eyed. Miss Hightower stood off to the side, giving her an encouraging nod. Zariah took a deep breath and told the story again. Not just the slap. Not just the hate. But the moment someone chose not to look away. And the moment she decided her voice mattered. A local news reporter sitting in the back took notes. A day later, a headline appeared online: "Middle schooler's story of mid-air racism goes viral and sparks change." The news traveled fast. A follow-up story confirmed that Edith Langston had been charged with assault and placed on the federal no-fly list. The airline issued a formal apology and promised to retrain staff and prioritize passenger safety and equity. But the real shift wasn't in the headlines. It was in the whispers. Zariah heard in the hallways. One girl pulled her aside after gym. "My brother got called a name at the store last year," she said. "But he didn't say anything. I think now he might." A boy in her science class stayed after one afternoon. "My grandma says stuff like that too. I used to just ignore it, but maybe I should say something." The ripple was spreading. One voice at a time. One moment at a time. That weekend, Zariah sat in her bedroom, the sun pouring in through the blinds. She opened her journal and flipped to a clean page. Then, slowly, she wrote, "They tried to shrink me. But now I know, I carry something bigger than they ever imagined." She underlined it twice. She thought of Malcolm, wherever he was, hoping he knew how much he changed her. Hoping he knew that the little girl with the ginger ale can and trembling hands had found her voice. And she was just getting started. Sometimes, the moments that define us come when we least expect them. For Zariah Bennett, it wasn't in a classroom or at a ceremony, but 30,000 feet in the air, in the middle seat of a commercial airplane, where injustice found her, and where courage found its voice. This story isn't just about a little girl who endured a hateful act. It's about what happens when someone chooses to speak up, and how one voice, even one as young as Zariah's, can ripple out and begin to change the world. There are days when silence feels like the easier road, when the fear of making a scene, of standing out, or of being judged keeps us quiet. But silence doesn't protect us from injustice. It protects the people who create it. When Malcolm Pierce stood up in that cabin, he wasn't just defending Zariah, he was challenging a system of silence, teaching everyone watching that decency requires action, not just thought. So here's the lesson I hope stays with you: you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be clear. You just have to be present. And you have to care enough to act. Zariah didn't fight back with anger or bitterness. She shared her story with grace, honesty, and quiet strength. And because she did, other students, teachers, and strangers found the courage to share their own. In a world that often tries to make us feel small, because of how we look, where we come from, or simply because we're different, remember, our stories are bigger than anyone's prejudice. To every young person out there, your voice matters, even if it shakes. To every adult, never underestimate the power of showing up for someone else. And to anyone who's ever been made to feel invisible, know this: you are seen, you are valuable, and your presence is not a problem. It's a gift. On behalf of U.S. Instructive Stories, thank you for listening to Zariah's journey. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you faced or witnessed, don't let it end here. Share it. Start a conversation. Encourage someone else to speak their truth. And above all, remember, justice starts with the decision to no longer stay silent. We're honored to share stories like this, true, powerful, and deeply human stories that reveal not only what's wrong with the world, but what's still right, people who care, people who protect, and people who rise. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that voices like Zariah's are worth hearing.